to not turn against it, you know?
Wait. All right, we are live now. How is everyone doing on this great Sunday of post-Liberation Day? We now live in a world without globalization. We've been freed from the globalists.
We've done it. China is defeated. No more trade with China except for our Apple smartphones. So everything is good.
Yeah.
Except for like 98 or like 85% of our trade with China has been exempted or something like that.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I'm not going to be able to get a new graphics card, it seems, for a new Witcher game. So
wait, there's a new Witcher game?
apparently so.
Yeah,
I don't know. Everyone's saying you're going to need a graphics card update for it. So
Damn, dude.
first world problems, as they say.
Yeah.
So today is going to be an interesting episode. We have a very special guest, Kate Willet. We're going to be talking about the YIMBY-Tech Right Nexus. Kate, I first came across her actually through her post about YIMBYism on Twitter. And she is a very, very good critic of these people. She's dug up a lot of good information about their funders and who's behind this stuff. And yeah, she's done a lot of very good work on this. And the YIMBYs really hate her. They always are calling her an idiot and saying she doesn't understand housing, blah, blah, blah. But
That's a good cosign for me. If the YIMBYs are attacking you, you're probably a friend of mine. So we're excited to have her on the show in just about 10 minutes or so.
yeah, just about 10 minutes. But before she comes on, I kind of wanted to talk about something happening in the world of the right, which is this debate within the MAGA sphere around Israel, because it does seem like there is a kind of not necessarily a split, because I do think like most MAGAs are still like pretty Zionist, but there seems to be a camp within the right that's starting to get kind of tired of Zionism. And so you know, and a lot of these guys go on Joe Rogan and you know, like I guess there's this guy Dave Smith. He's like this libertarian comedian. He's like friends with Joe Rogan. And they had this guy Douglas Murray come on to debate him. And this Douglas Murray guy, he's like, you know, he's pro-Ukraine, very pro-West, but he's also like a great replacement guy, I guess. So he's kind of like, you know, establishment Tory right, but like racist enough to kind of like appeal to the MAGA chuds in a way. So I guess they got him on to defend Israel, and a lot of people weren't really impressed with the arguments he was making. So there's a clip I wanted to show just to laugh at, because
God, you're gonna make me suffer through this.
no, it's actually kind of funny because they use his own arguments against him, because he was basically doing the whole thing of like you can't talk about Israel or Gaza unless you've been there. And it's so stupid.
I have the right to talk about whatever the hell I want. Have you been to the crossing points? I really resent that form of argumentation. When were you last there at all? Sure. I really resent it. You should at least do the courtesy of visiting it. This is not an attractive invitation. I think it's a good idea to see stuff, particularly if you spend a career talking about something. I have the right to talk about whatever the hell I want. And no one's going to stop me or try to intimidate me. And I think that if I said to somebody else the other way around, it would be equally reprehensible. I have a journalistic rule of trying never to talk about a country even in passing unless I've at least been there. If I said, shut up, you have no right to criticize anything that Douglas Murray says because... Hang on, you're talking about crossing points. And not only have you never been to a crossing point in either Egypt or in Israel, but you've never even been to the region. Okay, it's not an exact comparison, but seriously, is that a reasonable form of argument? No. In that case, nobody can talk about anything. We might as well pack up, go home and isolate ourselves. If you're insisting that you're an expert of some kind, or not claiming you're an expert, but still talking about it, if you've never seen any of this going on. I mean, there are some people who've written about there are people who've written about the Holocaust who didn't experience the Holocaust and have written about it better than people who did. But that is a different matter from spending an awfully long amount of time talking about an issue in a region you haven't even had the courtesy to visit.
Wait, has
whilst
this guy?
developing all of these views about it. This idea that the lived experience has to triumph over everything else is not always correct. You should at least know what it is, what the territory.
I think Douglas Murray's winning the argument.
Yeah, no, this is to them like their winning argument. Like I saw some of these like right wings Zionists who were like, oh man, Douglas Murray is a hero for going on there and like standing for the truth. It's like, dude, you cannot win this debate.
I have a funny story about so I have a good Algerian friend. He's an Algerian brother of mine. He was living in the West Bank for a period, and he was with this like really like nebbish kind of like annoying like Irish American guy. And well, first off, the cross points are just, they're awful. Like just the total asphyxiation of all movement. They're just,
oh yeah, no, it's
the brutality of it. It's like the scenes in Children of Men when they're entering the camps, like that on a daily basis. You know, people lining up for hours just so that they can make miserable wages. But anyway, so my friend, he's a very charismatic guy, and he's with this Irish American guy. And of course, my friend, they're crossing they're going through a cross point, and you know, the Israeli IDF guys are like, oh, we like this guy, you know, my Algerian friend, he's a charming, good looking guy. And then they look at the Irish American guy and they're like, you're fucking done. And they like anal probed him, dude. Like it was like awful. Like, and yeah, no, and that's what people go through on a daily fucking basis, you know. So it's like every Palestinian friend I've had when they talk about these checkpoints, just people can't even imagine just the humiliation and forms of harassment and torture that people undergo. Yeah, anyways, that guy, whoever, I fucking, the British are the worst, man. We Americans, we suck, but somehow the British annoy me like even more. I don't know. They're just so annoying. Like,
yeah, it's the rest of like the discussion, like obviously isn't much better, but he does the whole like Anglo civilization defending the West against Asiatic barbarism, and how if Israel doesn't exist, like there's no bulwark to like defend us from like, you know, the Oriental, you know, menace of, you know, kept talking. He always goes back to like whenever like they bring up all the atrocities, he always goes back to October 7th and says, well, you shouldn't have done these things on October 7th then. Like it's nobody finds this stuff convincing.
No, they're really losing the debate, and no amount of intelligence can save them because the evidence is just overwhelming. So they have to resort to all kinds of obfuscation, like decontextualizing October 7th and resorting to pseudo philosophical arguments. Well, you've never been there. You can't know. What is knowledge? It's like no one's buying it. Really, no one's buying it. And that's why at this point, their only argumentative tactic is just to repress people and ruin their life. Because reality is against them. You know? Like honestly. I'm just so tired of
I mean, they're going after children's shows.
Yeah.
Miss Rachel, I think is her name.
Oh, yeah, dude. Like
it's gotten to that level. They're degenerating very quickly. They're
gonna like
children's shows.
Yeah, they're gonna like ship her to Guantanamo or whatever, like, you know, or Bagram Air Base. Like it's just oh god, it's just demoralizing.
It is really demoralizing.
You're saying even the right is not really sort of you know, finding a lot of sympathy with the arguments that Douglas Murray's making.
Yeah, even some people who are pro-Israel were kind of like, oh, this Douglas Murray guy is just like he's not like, you know, winning anyone over. Like like I think, you know, for some of these right wingers, I think for them the better tactic is to just like attack pro-Palestine protesters and like kind of like frame them as like these are just like the BLM anarchists, and you know, yeah, maybe Israel sucks or Israel's annoying, but these guys are worse. And like,
I mean, it's basically just like Heart of Darkness, just like kill all the brutes. You know, that's basically their argument when it comes. But that's what they end up going to. Like, well, who cares because they're subhuman or whatever. So, yeah,
Really,
it's brutal.
Yeah.
brutal people. Yeah, the British suck, dude. And like, you know, like, and not to hate on you, Jack, but Stanford produces the biggest ghouls in the US, but like Oxford and Cambridge, they spawn some pretty ghoulish people, just awful people.
Yeah, well, it's the new money, old money, and the new money is maybe more, I don't know, the Sovcore stuff that we're going to get into today, the YIMBY stuff. It's really pretty disgusting, but I don't know, the lords of, England and Europe and, the roads, of the world, like, it's hard to really hold a candle to those people just because they've been doing it for so long, if nothing else.
Just some asshole called like Lord Sandwich who's just wants to restore the British Empire in all its glory, to spread the light of British constitutionalism to the savages.
Yeah, I mean, they see Zionism as the last stand of this civilizing project.
Yeah, which is strange.
But the tech right people, they like it too, because for them it's their, the West Bank is the future, Sovcore, like Greenland or, I don't know.
And they get to test out all their technology there too.
Wait, did you guys actually see the AI video of like the Riviera of the Middle East?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. I never saw that. But I can only imagine how ghastly it is.
No, it's very ghastly stuff.
The moment that was produced, I realized. Well, I further knew that AI was a failure, a categorical failure. Yeah, it's the dumbest thing you'll ever see, honestly.
All right, so I think we are ready to have Kate on, Jack. Let's bring her in.
Hi.
Hi there, comrade.
Welcome.
Hi, how's it going? Nice to see you guys.
See you too.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Kate. To introduce you to our audience, Kate Willet's a comedian, actress, and writer who's appeared on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, Netflix's comedy lineup. She's the author of the Audible original Dirtbag Anthology, the co-host of the political comedy podcast The Reply Guys, and she's written jokes for our favorite boys, Beavis and Butthead. As Donald mentioned at the jump, we've been following your sort of research, Kate, into the world of the abundance pundits, the YIMBYs, the sort of SF tech right crew, and all of these kind of overlap in maybe not so fun but kind of crazy ways. So I think we've got a lot to talk about. Thanks again for coming on, Kate. Maybe we could start with the abundance pundits. I think this is kind of the new thing on the scene in the Democratic Party. Derek Thompson, Ezra Klein's kind of new book and their project with a lot of other backers, this argument for abundance through deregulation. So maybe, Kate, from your research, maybe we could start off with, what is abundance and like who are the public faces of abundance and who are maybe the, behind the public, the backers of this kind of ideology?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I just want to say one thing. So I probably should have given you a new bio because Reply Guys is now defunct, but I have a new podcast called Dystopia Now where we talk about tech ideologies. So it fits right in. So for real haters of these people
that's awesome.
and the tech freaks, you may enjoy that one. I co-host it with Emil Torres, who is a amazing researcher and PhD that talks about the terrestrial movement. So anyway, back to this question. Abundance is like, okay, abundance is a few things. So I'll kind of start with like different definitions. Like on the one hand, it's like the tech buzzword, kind of like how innovate or disrupt was. So it's just like a thing that like tech, am I allowed to swear on this?
Of course. Free speech zone.
It's like a thing that douchebags say a lot. So it's literally just that. So when you see abundance, it may just be like seeing disrupt. But San Francisco and then now the rest of the country has this thing called the YIMBY movement, which like has good and bad aspects. Okay, in San Francisco in about 2014, tech billionaires were getting a lot of crap from the public because a bunch of tech workers moved to San Francisco and they had like the Google bus that was using public stops, and a lot of people who were working class San Franciscans lost their housing. San Francisco's homeless problem skyrocketed. Most of the people who were living outside actually had homes before, and people started to get really mad at the tech billionaires for not, thinking this through. San Francisco's only like 7 by 7, so miles. So it's a small space, and adding, a ton of people to it at once who are super high income really messes up like the housing situation. I think my own rent was doubled during 2014. But so like, it's tech guys. So like, whereas, we might be like, oh, it's clearly time to build social housing. So we can, add affordable units that working class people can live in. These guys hooked up with this local anarcho-capitalist wacko who had this organization called SF BARF. That was the real name. SF Bay Area Renters Federation. And Jeremy Stoppelman, who was the CEO of Yelp, gave her $10,000 to like start promoting this idea that she had, that all we needed to do for affordable housing is upzone, just get rid of like, limits on, height limits, units, also, any sort of requirements around union labor. Like she's a libertarian. So like this lady is probably extreme enough that even like some of the safety requirements could go. And, and it just it grew into something called the YIMBY movement that attracted a wide variety of characters. I mean, definitely some Bay Area type of tech libertarians, and also, just like classic lib type people, who would like use this sort of, language about social justice. Like, just some examples are like, we need to build more housing because then that way, women will be able to live in our state where we can get abortions. Like, there's nothing inherently wrong with it, except for the fact that upzoning, and we can link some studies about this, it has some impact, but it does not have like a mind-blowing impact, because there's other factors in building housing. Like, for example, being able to get financing. Like, interest rates are really important to be able to get the financing to build housing, and to how affordable you can make that housing in the end. Land prices are very determinant of how expensive that housing is in the end. So like, the idea that if you just get rid of housing in if you just get rid of zoning in San Francisco, all of a sudden you're going to get $1,000 apartments. Not really, but it might go down. It might go down. The rent might go down a little bit, like 1 to 2% adjusted for inflation. Like, we're talking about something small that is beneficial, especially for like with us from like a leftist perspective. Like, Bernie Sanders' housing plan had like, upzoning plus social housing plus tenant protection. It's like one tool in the toolbox, but these people wanted it as the only tool because they're free market ideologues. And this kind of metastasized over the 2016 to 2022 period, until in 2022, a lot of these like tech YIMBYs and, other like kind of just tech aligned people, tech workers and tech founders in San Francisco really started to want like basically a moderate political revolution in San Francisco. They took out progressive DA Chesa Boudin. They recalled members of their school board. They did a total replacement, basically, of the city's like Democratic Party, staffing it all up with moderate tech aligned people, and
with some pretty racist campaigning, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. And these billionaires, like they have like these organizations. There's like 4 of them: Abundant SF, Together SF, Neighbors for a Better San Francisco, and Grow SF. And they're all like fervently YIMBY. They're all like super pro cop. They're all, very just kind of presenting this vision of like, we can make San Francisco the suburbs again. Like, hey, you're a tech guy, but you can have everything that you want from your, fancy schmancy suburb, like right here in San Francisco. We can just throw all these homeless people in jail. No worries. We don't have to do anything. We can just, just kind of having like police crackdowns be the solution to everything, instead of, for example, building social housing so that people who are living outside can live inside. In my opinion, the clear solution, right? But these organizations grew, and they had just billions and billions in, not billions, I'm sorry, millions in tech money from billionaires. And they really kind of staged this AstroTurf takeover that knocked out Democratic Socialist Dean Preston, and they were basically able to create like a new right-wing kind of Dem from whole cloth, where these donors, like some of them would be like actual Trump donors, Trump donating billionaires, and they would be funneling money into these races and PR campaigns that were very aimed at Democrats, and this worked really well for them. So in my opinion, what they're trying to do right now is this strategy in like on a national level, which is in some ways kind of funny, because like zoning is a huge problem in San Francisco, but like like in other parts of the country, it's just like not going to be like as at the forefront as in San Francisco. You know what I mean? Like there's just plenty of areas of the country where like NIMBYism and like a, high-speed rail isn't going to be like it's not the main political issue in like West Virginia or something, So, there's these guys, Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, and their buddies, Matt Iglesias, Jerusalem Demsis, Eric Levitz. I call them the extended Vox universe crew. They don't all work for Vox at the moment. Most of them do have some connection to Vox. And, they've been spreading this like YIMBY abundance thing for a while. Abundance is like YIMBYism, but expanded to other issues besides housing, like regulate, the public transportation. And it's basically like the thesis that red tape is the source of our problems, right? And not like, I mean, red tape could be the source of some problems, absolutely. But, it's like, there's also other things, like there's the way that like monopolies lobby for laws that are going to be, favorable to them. And, just there's just like, it depends on the issue, but there's just many things that even create the red tape in the first place. It's a lot of times like corruption sort of written into the law, and you can't just be like, get rid of it. But Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson and Matt Iglesias and the extended Vox universe, their thesis is that literally every time there's red tape, it's because the left loves red tape. Like, to give a concrete example, to stop talking in the abstract, there's this bill that Biden had, to do rural broadband, and I think very little rural broadband was actually installed, and that is because the cable monopolies lobbied to make it really hard to install because they don't want competition. But Ezra Klein's out here being like, yeah, the leftists wanted this. Like, no, they didn't. Like, you're just not willing to look at how corporate power and big are actually screwing with this whole situation. And he got called out by the person in the Biden administration that was actually, I think, responsible for implementing this program, that were like, yeah, basically Republicans made us put this BS in the bill so that we could pass it. Because some of them were like bought off by the cable monopolies or whatever. So it's okay. And here so far, I'm like, yeah, these people are annoying, but it's kind of in the sort of standard lib fare. It's like punching left. It's not really identifying like the, the sort of like just the way that money and politics is impacting all this. But a dynamic that I see emerging now is there's these Vox pundits or whatever, like Ezra Klein, Matt Iglesias, but some of the people that are like involved in this kind of stuff in San Francisco, they are tech right guys. And to me, the way that this whole book tour is happening, it seems like it's kind of a bid to get people like Mark Andreessen, sort of maybe to give the Democratic Party a second look again.
Yeah.
A lot of Democrats left. I mean, a lot of tech billionaires left because, the CFPB and the FTC under Biden was like, they were willing to punish these billionaires. Like, I think that Andreessen was like, he was an investor in some company that was scamming people, like just straight up scamming people. And, they got in trouble with the CFPB for doing a scam, taking people's money. Basically like there's been this kind of, this like move towards Trump from all these tech guys. Like there's the people that have always been Trump, like Thiel, for example, but like people who used to be Democrats. Obviously the most famous one is Elon Musk, but the other figures, Andreessen, Zuckerberg, and the way that this abundance stuff is being used at the moment is to say, hey, Silicon Valley, let's have, let's stop with this whole left populist thing that has been getting you down. And we are going to have, an abundance Democratic Party. And it's functioning very much like the Democratic Leadership Council type, I don't want to say takeover because they haven't been able to take it over. It's just their idea at this point. They would like to. But, there's all these different sort of think tanks and, like organizations that are funding it. And some of it is like kind of traditional libertarian funding, like, the Koch network.
Yeah.
But plenty of the funding is coming from effective altruism, which it's, it's like, it's from, open philanthropy and, other tech billionaires who are into like really kind of sci-fi shit, like long-termism, like kind of the Curtis Yarvin anti-democracy stuff. And people will say that this abundance stuff is like just neoliberalism rebranded. And I think that is actually mostly true. But with these sort of tech right guys, there's definitely, I think, an element sort of beyond what people are talking about. Like, to give a concrete example, the Foundation for American Innovation is one of the kind of 7 core abundance think tanks pushing this stuff. And they're lobbying the Trump administration for freedom studies, which will be these special economic zones within the United States. And some of the other people involved in that lobbying effort, it's like Pronomos Capital, which is a VC firm that like Thiel has funded a lot of their projects. And they have like this special economic zone called Prospera in Honduras.
Yeah, we talked about.
No, we were looking into Honduras. That's really scary stuff because
and how it's
the
like
ethics regulations that a lot of these people are rebelling against. Like when, like Andreessen, for example, like there was ethics regulations in AI. I think that really got a lot of these people to turn towards MAGA.
Exactly.
But we were also looking at how the kind of dark enlightenment ideology of Sovcores was sort of being pushed by these people concretely in the form of free economic zones, and how this could partially also explain kind of like the erratic program for the takeover of Greenland that Trump has gotten into. Because like, for a lot of people, that kind of came out of nowhere. They're like, why Greenland? And we were kind of trying to explain to people or to show that it might have to do precisely with like this ideology of the Sov Corps and kind of recreating like the modern day Venice or whatever.
Yeah, it's actually, so Pronamos Capital, or no, is it Pronamos? Praxis. Basically, Praxis is this other company that they want to build one of these tech bros network state type things in the Mediterranean. And the CEO of Praxis actually went to Greenland and said that he wanted to buy it. And
Dryden Brown is his name, right?
Yeah. And in terms of like the investors in Praxis, it's like Srinivasan, Balaji Srinivasan, the network state guy.
Yeah, that guy is,
of course.
But
there's also like this guy named Tyler Cowen, maybe. He's an economist at the Mercatus Center, and he's like super extra BFF with Peter Thiel. He advocates for this thing called state capacity libertarianism. And Cohen is like, he's a central figure in this abundance stuff. He and the CEO of Stripe, a guy named Patrick Collision, co-founded this, like, I'm doing like bunny quotes, discipline called Progress Studies. And there's
oh my God, the name is just so on the nose.
Yeah. And they have a think tank that, it's called the Institute for Progress. And they say, IFP says like, hey, it's not just these guys' think tank, but like, if you look at like the money and what they promote and stuff, there's a very close relationship, and it's certainly based on their work. And IFP is one of the main think tanks in this little like 7 to 8, group of think tanks that is really like, attending the abundance conferences, like working together to write these policy proposals. Niskanen Center, which is like a center-right / libertarian think tank, put out this whole blog post. It was basically like, we are trying to take over the Democratic Party, and these are the organizations that are in our little faction to do it. So I just looked up a lot of info about what those organizations are doing, and some of them are just like eye roll, just third way. Like the Center for New Liberalism is just, it like literally just is an offshoot of the PPI, which is like a offshoot of like third way. It's just kind of standard, like annoying ass Bill Clinton type of politics. But others like the Foundation for American Innovation and Progress Studies, they definitely have people, both funders and people working there that are really involved in these far right tech ideologies. Like Patrick Collision, the Stripe guy I mentioned a second ago, he was a investor in the California Forever project. I don't know if you talked about that, but it's this basically like the tech bros, Mark Andreessen, Patrick Collision, Nat Friedman, who is the co-founder of YIMBY, Laureen Powell Jobs, and Patrick Collision's brother, a couple other like really rich tech people. They tried to do this kind of Chinatown, the movie type plot, where they just bought up a bunch of land in a very rural area and kept their identities super secret from the farmers. And finally, after like 2 years of people speculating about like who's buying all this land, is it a hostile foreign adversary? Is it Disneyland? They find out that it's this group of billionaires, and they want to establish this like charter city kind of tech company town, sort of an hour and a half outside of the Bay Area. And Patrick Collision was one of the main investors in that. And like, to me, this stuff it's alarming because, when you guys were talking about the special economic zone, like I can tell you both from reading and from my own experience, talking to these people living in San Francisco for a long time, it's not like, oh, cool, we will have a little zone where we can all do our thing. Like they intend this as a model for governance for, this is the test case for like why we should have government by corporation like they do in process.
Yeah, no, they're not building acid and like hang out, they're building the network state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does seem like there's like as you mentioned, like the more sort of standard third way, like neoliberal kind of Democrat model that fits within the abundance kind of group. Like Jared Polis, the governor of Colorado. I think maybe he fits in that more kind of standard third way Democrat. He's very pro YIMBY and very anti-union. But then this universe also contains these kind of like tech right, anti-democratic kind of Sov core folks as well. I guess I wonder, how do Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson kind of fit all of these people under their kind of coalition? Like, how are they trying to kind of square that circle between something that's more let's just cut the red tape and let the market do its job versus let's let companies take over kind of government? How are they kind of squaring that on their campaign trail?
Yeah, so I think that I'm going to be as generous to Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson as possible, just to steel man their position.
Right.
My own interpretation is not actually this generous, but I think from Derek and Ezra Klein's perspective, the way that they're thinking about this is politics are more polarized than ever. There's just a lot of dysfunctional behavior happening from Republicans, from Democrats. Things are stuck and we can't make people's lives better. So here we have this opportunity to, do something that can be nonpartisan, right? Like we have this coalition between supply side progressives, what they call themselves, and between, the guys that call themselves state capacity libertarians. This is Tyler Cowen's term. And Tyler Cowen says that he basically developed this, way of thinking about politics from his friend, Peter Thiel, right? Where they talk about there will be a state. We're not going full, abolish the state, but the function of the state will be basically solely to protect capital. That's what it is going to do. You guys will hear that and you're like, well, that sounds quite fashy, and I would agree. But so this kind of the supply side progressives.
It also sounds typically liberal, actually, as a matter of fact.
Well, I think that they mean it in a much more extreme way than Ezra Klein does. They do not support a social safety net, for example. It would be very much
right
on your own.
But I mean liberal, liberal in the classical sense. The only reason that government exists,
like a night watchman state,
is to ensure the conditions for private property and accumulation. That's the only thing it does.
Yeah, and I think that gets to a really important point because Quinn Slobodian has been talking about this a lot. With a lot of these ideas, it's sort of very hard to tell where neoliberalism ends and where something maybe more akin to fascism begins, especially with these kind of anarcho-capitalists, Peter Thiel type guys, in a way what they're suggesting just is neoliberalism, right? It's not. It's like Javier Milei would be an example in Argentina, and Quinn is way better about talking about this stuff than I am. But I just wanted to kind of make that point that with some of these people, there's not sort of a clear line between what neoliberals advocate for and what somebody who would be a libertarian is advocating for, or somebody who, one of these guys like Thiel or Andreessen, who really wants a type of authoritarian capitalism. But it's all privatization, it's all I think it's easy to call it fascism because what some of them are hoping for, especially, on the, just a level of sort of surveillance, the level of policing that they're envisioning. They do want to live in a state where people, in my opinion, would have substantially less freedom because we'd all be spied on all the time by AI. Right. There would not be voting in a traditional sense. Maybe we would
want to eliminate any kind of democratic voice whatsoever.
Yeah.
You have the freedom to consume and be exploited. Unless you're a capitalist, then you have the freedom to exploit and accumulate.
Yeah.
And there should be no political civic life because that's a waste of time.
Yeah, I think that's when it comes to like how these people think of their collaboration, the supply side progressives, I kind of roll my eyes at Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson calling themselves progressives, but let's use their term. The supply side progressives and the state capacity libertarians, they both have fundamentally the same thesis, which is that if the market is allowed to function without restriction, it will lead to a better consumer experience, lower prices, and the thing that's in the way of the market functioning the way that it's supposed to is democracy. And for Klein and Thompson, the kind of democracy, the voice that we'll talk about removing will be like, the ability of like environmental groups and homeowners to have a say in the development of their neighborhood. And by the way, I'm not even saying that I'm 100% against that. Like NIMBYism is real. There are shitty white people that don't want affordable housing. So I'm not, I think it gets more complicated when it's like a bunch of billionaires deciding that they're gonna like remake a lower income neighborhood with rich people, state-sponsored gentrification. But I just want to articulate, like, I'm not saying that we should only have single family zoning. There's no way, but just that the thesis, the idea that they're putting forward is that democracy is what is standing in the way of the market functioning versus, focusing on, like, for example, how, something like RealPage, like this kind of software that companies got in trouble for, property management companies got in trouble for using to restrict the supply, or how developers, will not build unless they can get financing that will, guarantee that they make a good return, which actually requires rent increases, right? Like there's other problems in housing and why housing doesn't get built other than just the sort of democracy element, but they hyper focus on the democracy. Right. And for like these ANCAP guys, or the state capacity libertarians, the authoritarian capitalists, their dream is to have like no democracy at all, basically, that you live in a place that is owned by a corporation and that your vote is that you can leave if you want.
It's an exit over voice or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And so, they're on that sort of spectrum, all of them. And, I don't think that like what Klein and Thompson are arguing for is anything like the world that, say, Peter Thiel is advocating for. I really don't. And, that would be overstating it. But I do think that, you're a person and you hear like, hey, this is, if democracy is the main obstacle to markets functioning, and markets functioning is being impeded, is the main reason that I can't have affordable housing, that, my food is expensive, that, you're like, well, then why would we fuck with Ezra Klein, frankly, when there's these other people who will, go like, much further, and I think that's why Elon Musk kind of keeps retweeting Ezra Klein, because he knows that how helpful this argument is. That I think Klein and Thompson are making somewhat in good faith. It's myopic. It's annoying. Like they just very much seem like, refusing to sort of engage with the other things that make housing expensive. And I'm not even the stuff that I think as like a socialist, like the stuff that just, a straight up, professor who's like a neolib would write about the things that are making housing expensive, the financing, the land prices. So, I think it's just like the abundance liberalism they're offering something that really seems like the diet version of the sort of like anarcho-capitalist authoritarian capitalism that the tech right guys are into, and they're also concretely working together, like on proposals for freedom cities, or like this like kind of network state weirdo plan in Solano, California YIMBY supported that. Their co-founder was an investor, but when Freedom Cities happens, if they are able to do that. Like you're not going to see any of these people come out against it. I don't think. No, they're going to make the case for it, even though it is something that
YIMBY stuff here.
Yeah, exactly.
For YIMBY zoning.
Yeah, I mean they see it as like I think Klein, Thompson, Matt Iglesias, like I do think that there are aspects of what those guys believe in that I'm fine with. Like I'm sure that they don't want to hurt LGBT people. Like they want Social Security and like there's I mean I want a bigger safety net than they do, like a much bigger safety net, but it's not.
Well,
they're
yeah,
not out here trying to take checks away from grandma, right? But their friends are, and I don't think that they see how they're being sort of useful to them, both by the rhetoric that they're using and also like their kind of concrete political collaborations with these people around stuff like freedom cities, charter cities.
Yeah,
I started reading the Abundance book. I read like a third of it, and at first, before I read it, my initial reaction to like the book tour, reading with Richard Hanania, the Nazi guy, reading with all these people is like, oh, they're just trying to kind of get like the tech guys back into the Democratic Party orbit, just like the good old Obama days. I started reading it, and it's like, well, he actually is kind of trying to appeal to progressives here. Like he literally starts out talking about like fully automated luxury communism. And just very utopian vision, and he also goes after like he does try to like appeal to progressives, like making this case against like homeowner politics, like the regressive nature of homeowner politics, but then he goes after like the Ralph Nader environmental lawyers, and it's like he's like, well, they did help bring down emissions, and they did accomplish some good things, but the legal architecture they've created has now become an impediment to building clean energy. And so therefore, we need to kind of demolish this whole thing. And that's where you can see the alignment with the tech right people.
Yeah. I mean, I think that like, I think as individual policy suggestions, like, like the ideas in that book are debatable. I certainly don't think that there's anything about it that is inherently fascist. I think that they're overstating a little bit what, something like zoning changes will do, which like, I think the studies are showing like, hey, especially if you do it near transit, it can result in, some additional housing, which will like lower the price a little bit. If you, just give like single family homeowners the ability to build, duplexes, some of them will do it, but most people will just sort of leave it how it is. But so basically, I just want to say like the thing that I object to is not really like the policy suggestions as much as, sort of as a program for the Democratic Party. Like you were talking about the intro of that book. It starts with this really weirdo fantasy. Like, this sort of like, it's like fully automated luxury communism without any of the things that are going to like
it's actually horrible
communism, right? Like, which is worker power, which is, depending on whether you're like a democratic socialist or a more, sort of traditional Marxist, like there's no sort of proletarian uprising, democratic or not, that
there's also no people. It's just this like, it's just like you buy this thing, you buy that thing, there's no social life in his vision.
It's like
new tech that makes everything so much better.
Like,
I mean, like
he doesn't mention like a rich social life or anything appealing.
It's very like sort of, it reminds me of the sort of beginning of that movie Gattaca or something. I don't know. I may be like way too.
Gattaca's better.
Yeah.
At least there's music with people with 6 fingers and like
there's basically like there's a lot of debate around AI in Silicon Valley right now that I think very much influences this book, right? Like Mark Andreessen a few years back wrote this thing called the Techno Optimist Manifesto. I don't know if you guys have talked about this, but it's
we read it on here. We read it. It was horrible.
Yeah, and so Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, and I think this part is, from what I understand, sort of more Klein's contribution. It's I like to make fun of him and call him like Lib Andreessen, because it's a vision of techno optimism for liberals. It's basically like a lot of the same arguments that Andreessen makes about how, like, by like getting rid of red tape. We're going to unleash this technological innovation, and it is the technical innovation that will eventually allow us to, you know, give everyone like a good standard of living. And these, you know, I think Klein even says in the intro, like something very close to, you know, because AI was created with the knowledge of all humanity, the profits will be shared. Okay, yeah, I guess I believe that he believes that maybe we would do some kind of UBI type thing, but that's just, I think that's hopelessly naive. Like, you know, maybe there'll be like some kind of UBI thing, but I don't see any reason to basically think that like, okay, well, right now we got these billionaires like Elon Musk, these other tech guys hoarding all this wealth from themselves, and people are, you know, just living, you know, without being able to treat their cancer. But when we just get a little more innovation, these billionaires are going to want to share their wealth. I don't know if it's like the Grinch or something. I guess they're imagining like we finally reached a level of AI where my heart is now open to the Who's and Whoville, and we're just gonna give everyone UBI, and everybody's gonna have all this like leisure time, but without ever dealing with like the power dynamics that are the reason that, you know, we don't actually get to share in the existing abundance at all. And I think that it's just, I think what Klein's saying, like, you know, he doesn't get into this sort of explicitly fascist stuff that Andreessen, who cites a literal Italian fascist as one of the,
yeah, Robert Michel,
you know, but it's sort of the same like delusional thinking that basically like technological innovation and capitalism are going to result in a world where there's very little poverty, and it's got like the Salulu is Delulu written all over it, you know?
Yeah, it's delusional is the right word for it. I also think like, yeah, naive, the diet version of what's happening right now. I think that all makes a ton of sense. I think Two's described it as like they have no understanding of political economy, which I think makes sense. I mean, it's like you kind of like, I don't understand why the tech folks would be won over to this when like, you know, the Doge crew is like, you know, making it so that Social Security is now only going to be communicated over X. You know,
yeah,
like,
no, it's crazy. I mean, I think like this is, you know, kind of talking about the sort of like funders. So there's definitely like, you know, there's Arnold Ventures, which is like a former Enron exec. There's you know, Stand Together, which is like a, you know, Koch family trust, but a lot of the abundance money and a lot of the money for every organization, every YIMBY organization basically across the country is all just coming from this one guy. Who is a co-founder of Facebook and Asana, and he is an effective altruist who his name is Dustin Moskowitz, second largest donor to the Democratic Party, I believe. And he and Reid Hoffman are kind of like the two tech billionaires that are like holding it down for like the possibility of like a Democratic Party. And Moskowitz keeps a really low profile. And even his donations, he kind of stays out of like controversial shit, at least like stuff that other people are going to like. The average person who's not a weirdo that like is like looking into this tech stuff. Like he doesn't put his thumb on the scale in like primaries, right? Like he's not donating to the centrists to crush the left. When he gave money this round, he did most of it through Future Forward PAC, which is the largest Democratic PAC. And, you know, he's trying not to like stir up, you know, resentment and stuff. And he's been a very vocal critic of Musk. I know that Dustin Moskowitz, from the things he funds, is also very concerned about AI safety, which AI safety is like, you know, just not destroying the entire world. And so like, you know, they basically are like trying to sort of get Silicon Valley back by like, you know, making people into Democrats again. And this is the way that they're doing it. And
Kate, I want to pivot a little bit because I know we have only about 15 minutes, but you mentioned kind of the trying to bring Democrats back to San Francisco. I think we've talked kind of, high level about the political origins, the ideas, the roots, the connections between Abundance, the YIMBYs, the tech right folks. But you spent a lot of time in San Francisco. You've lived in San Francisco. I think we could, I would love to hear, or maybe I wouldn't love to hear, but I'm interested to hear, what do things look like on the ground in San Francisco, like talking to some of these people who are like effective altruist or softcore kind of people? What's kind of the Kool-Aid that they're drinking? What are people talking about? What's the vision that people are into?
Yeah, so when I was younger, like after I just graduated from college, I went to the very first Ephemeral, which was like the project for the Seasteading Institute, the thing that Peter Thiel was funding for Patrick Friedman, where these libertarians were going to go homestead the open sea. And it was a really weird party. I got into conversations with these guys who were talking about, how there was going to be immortality pills at any minute, and it was going to make the women really horny, that they weren't going to die. And then so we would have, sex for all, and just like just kind of incel stuff. But also, this was, I think, in 2009, but I mean, I've also been into stuff with a lot of these kind of like, tech type people where like, I think what's disconcerting to me is I've probably had a very good time with people who have this like type of mentality. Like I've enjoyed going to, different art festivals, bike parties in the Bay, and like it's all mixed in with these like kind of things about California that are sort of fun and pleasant, like riding bikes. I love bikes. I like, I like camping, right? And like I think that it is just sort of all, you get these people with these really like far right ideas, these, cryptocurrency, anarcho-capitalists who are like, oh shit, like you're trying to like overthrow the government, and you like read this guy that thinks that, poor people should be turned into biodiesel, I think is a real thing that Curtis Yarvin said. But they seem like Californians. They're cosmopolitan. They're accepting of LGBT people. They're, not going to say stuff that is overtly racist, even though I think that some of the tech right has moved into that. But even their dark beliefs, the stuff, a lot of the effective altruists and rationalists, they do believe in like, I'm going to do the biggest like eye roll fake quote, like race science and stuff. Like that's not that conversation with Hanania is not an anomaly. That stuff is very present in the effective altruism and rationalist communities, but they don't lead with that stuff. So I think.
Oh yeah, no, they call it human biodiversity,
exactly.
And they start with IQ and they warm.
Yeah, and I think like there's sort of a range. Like you're asking about Gary Tan. Like Gary Tan pretended to be a moderate. That was his word for himself, and that was the word that kept being used to describe him in newspapers. Like, okay, this guy spoke at the Network State Conference. He has said that his goal with this abundance stuff in San Francisco, literally, he said, we have to build here, because if we can build here, I can't figure out the exact quote, but basically he said his goal is taking over the country and the world. It was fucking insane. And it's like, this stuff just, it isn't moderate at all. And, there's like, the kind of, it's just because it's California and because people are accepting of LGBT people and stuff, like this really kind of far right nonsense, is.
I'm sorry, as an East Coaster, I just have to say that just what the hell is California? Like, what have you people produced? It is weird as fuck. Every time I read about these like obscure ideologies, I think I'm in a Thomas Pynchon novel.
Yeah.
And that I'm like going insane and losing my grasp of reality. It's really Kafkaesque. Like some of
no, Pynchon was a realist. Pynchon was a realist.
Yeah, I mean, like, it is so California. Like, the reason that they chose abundance as a word, I can definitely. Two's pointed this out on Twitter, and I've noticed this myself too, that it is like, it's a fashionable rationalization of polyamory, right? Like, the word abundance gets used all the time in this sort of like 5 years ago polyamory community, like, you know, and then it's like a kind of a self-help thing, like the, you know, abundance mindset. And a lot of the sort of ways that they talk, as to me, as a Californian, especially someone who lived in the Bay Area for a long time, I'm like, yeah, you know, they're pulling from the sort of new age self-help, also cult tradition in the Bay Area, the sort of sex positive tradition. And you know, it's just, but
fascist. Yeah,
it's this with like kind of like a sort of fascist power structure. So it's confusing because people don't. I think what worries me about it is that for a long time people sort of didn't recognize how right wing it is. Some of these people are just into full blown eugenics, transhumanism, full blown eugenics, the like race and IQ stuff. It's just, I mean, it's Nazi shit, but they don't talk like the like Christo fascists, like Jesus people, where like we gotta ban the gays, you know.
Well, you know, the OG fascists, so to speak, they were really good at having a double message.
Yeah.
Because they were actually very elitist. Like, if you look at Hitler's statements, he's very elitist. He has a massive disdain for the ordinary folk or whatever. And they have a different public message. They're very, very good at concealing kind of their esoteric beliefs and projecting a different set of beliefs. Because these people fundamentally know that, first off, they're misanthropic and that they hate everyone. They hate humanity. And so they can't actually show their real beliefs because they're despicable, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, no, these people just the gulag straight up. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, one thing my podcast co-host Emil Torres, who is Emil back in the day was an effective altruist and a long-termist, and then when it went off the internet and they started going to the conferences and stuff like that, they would hear people talking about, you know, promoting scientific racism and stuff, and they were like, oh shit, like maybe this isn't my community, like, and started to look again at the ideologies about how something like long-termism, which is like we need to prioritize the safety and flourishing of digital beings 10 billion years into the future, is actually an excuse for you know, worker exploitation and pillaging the, you know, resources in developing nations now, right? Like the way that it's functioning is to justify like horrible inequality. And so Emil started writing about this stuff. They got Timnit Gebru and Emil Torres. They have this acronym called TESRIAL. It stands for transhumanism, rationalism, extropianism, cosmism, singularitarianism, effective altruism, and accelerationism, and long-termism. And so many people in Silicon Valley are bought into these ideologies, some combination of these ideologies, and it just like leads back to like the end point of all of it is just it's neoliberalism and it's eugenics, and
it's genocide. They have a deeply genocidal way of thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Curtis Yarvin, I mean, he has like from one of his classic, his patchwork essay, he's like, we need the humane like alternative to genocide is like the ultimate like solution to like every social engineering problem is like the ultimate like solution is to find the humane solution.
The is supposedly like, some, you know, Ubermensch. Okay, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think that, you know, a lot of these people ranging from the tech billionaires to just the more sort of right-wing tech workers who are super bought into this stuff, I'm not even sure that all of them, some of them think of themselves as right-wing, but a lot of them think of themselves as liberal. And I think, like, you know, with this abundance stuff, it's, it is a rewarmed neoliberalism. That's absolutely true. That take is not wrong, but it also includes, especially from, you know, what the funders are into in practice, it does include a lot of this like TESRIAL nonsense. Like the whole thing, like if you look at who's working at these organizations, it's just a fuck ton of effective altruists. And like, that's like, this is not dissimilar to like if the Church of Scientology were making a bid to be like the major faction in the Democratic Party. Like it's strange.
But there is some cope among some of the effective altruist people who are like, oh well, we don't believe in all the racist stuff. We're like, good liberals, and there is like some attempt to kind of like bifurcate like the more like liberal versions of this from the more far right versions. But I don't.
Yeah, I'm sure that there are people who are effective altruists that are not into this like scientific racism stuff. Like that's real, but just like the underlying assumptions of the effective altruist ideology are supremely neoliberal. It's like that kind of like sweatshops are good kind of shit. Like he literally, Bill McCaskill literally says that in his book. I think he has a chapter called "The Moral Case for Sweatshops." And so, to think it's not racist, you really have to be committed to not thinking about anything in a more systemic way,
Yeah, it's like the Mitchell and Webb "Are We the Baddies" kind of sketch. At a certain point, you do have to look at yourself and ask, like, what the hell are we doing here? But I do think, like, I don't know, like seeing the tech folks in the Bay Area, it does seem like part of the reason that folks can get caught up in this is similar to like a cult, where it is a very isolated environment. Like if you're working at a tech company or you're in the tech scene, like you're going to parties with the tech people, you're getting on your bus and you're going to your tech campus and you're talking to sort of that group of people. And then you go back to San Francisco and you're kind of in your bubble. And I think it's just like very easy for people to fall into this kind of like very insidious kind of politics. I mean, some people are, like just kind of reactionary from the get-go, but I do think some of these, it isn't something that's explicitly like racist, but then you kind of get, 5 layers deep and then you are kind of,
Well, listen, it's also like, an ideology is meant to, it has a psychological effect of rationalizing what is unconsciously taken to be an injustice. And so insofar as you have massive inequality, class and racial in a place like California, you have to rationalize that. And the way you do it is by saying these aren't people, right? It's a very common dynamic. And I think that that's a lot of the root also of this just like misanthropy, class hatred, and racism and sexism, right?
Yeah.
To justify this shit.
I 100% agree. It's, it's very disturbed. Like there was this thing that went viral, this like Vox clip that basically was like a transhumanist talking about how like we shouldn't have like, we shouldn't have human babies anymore because then people become loyal to humans instead of AI. And our job is to bring like, AI into being. And it's like some of these people, not everybody, but some of these people are just now fully off the effing deep end,
Yeah, that's just
really crazy stuff.
Yeah, I mean that's just, where do you even start with that kind of?
I gotta ask though about this Armand
I fucking
Domalewski
hate that guy.
He keeps getting, I've riffed with him a few times on Twitter. But he keeps getting thrown into my timeline as like the kind of like progressive YIMBY, like abundance, like guy. And, apparently there's sexual assault allegations about him.
So
he denies them.
Yeah, I
don't know
think
anything about
Armand,
that,
there was, I think what that's coming from is there was like a East Bay Democrats club that he was in, and he was removed from the club. And I don't think it was for assault. I think it was for harassment. There may be other allegations. I don't know, but like he has I think he has kind of bad reputation with some people, and he was the co-founder of YIMBY's for Harris with this other venture capitalist woman who is really super annoying. And, Armand will present himself as a liberal. He will even spend a lot of time talking about like, oh yeah, like leftists didn't vote for Kamala. But the people that Armand hangs out with are like these straight up fascists, like Gary Tan, not just hangs out with, works with on a political project,
right.
Fully Trump supporters, right? Like it's like, okay, yeah, I voted for, Claudia, all right? Like, yes, I voted for the PSL candidate in New York, and you think that I am the person responsible for Trump when your tech buddies who literally gave millions of dollars to Trump they don't have any responsibility, and you're fine to just work with them on a project to, you know, have more police in San Francisco. It's disgusting.
Yeah, I gotta say, Armand, if you're watching, unblock Brussels sprouts.
You're not missing much. I'm blocked by Armand as well because I reposted the stuff that the screenshot of the allegations against him.
Right, the allegation.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I just
this
find
guy
this-
seems like a loser.
Yeah, this tweet is so silly.
I'm just
I almost have to
it's
feel
so
bad
funny.
for Trump. You've deeply believed a thing your entire life. You finally get a chance to do it, and it's a complete disaster. It's like if I got to unleash YIMBY Utopia and made rents skyrocket. It's like, yeah, I guess what you have in common is that you're both like totally delusional about.
You're idiots. Yeah, you're both
Yeah.
idiots. Also, like Freudian slip, because that might actually happen. You know.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, listen, like my friend Cliff put it really well. Is like, you know, we both live in Florida. Like they've been building housing in Florida our entire lives. We see new housing being built everywhere all the time, and rent here just keeps getting.
Yeah,
more
I mean,
expensive, so.
rent, like housing gets built a lot, like in you know, in Texas and, you know, some of these like Sunbelt states. Like a big factor in whether like housing gets built is if there's still cheap lands where you can, you know, do greenfield building like sprawl and stuff like that. And it's like the idea of just promising people that the housing prices in LA or San Francisco is ever going to look like the outskirts of the Houston metro area. Get real, right? You know, like these people are peddling something pretty nonsensical. And I think, you know, with the YIMBY stuff, there's a lot of people who are sympathetic to it, you know, like even progressives that are like, yeah, you know, sure, like let's do this. And I have been saying for a long time, like, okay, it's their zoning reform idea. It's like it's okay. It's, you know, it would help a little bit. Like that's fine. Let's combine it with some tenant protections and do it. But you know, like the more wacko stuff that these people are into, they really showed their ass with the abundance thing in a way that I feel like is unfortunate because they were appealing to liberals, and I think they've kind of shown through all of these sort of tech right collaborations, these weird podcasts that they've done. Oh man, maybe there is something, you know, more going on here. Maybe their critics are actually noticing something real about their connections to this very straight up weird stuff, tech world.
Well, I think, you know, when I first come across the YIMBY stuff, it's like, these people are just annoying. Like, why are they like inserting themselves into like socialist spaces? And, you know, this is not proletarian politics. This is just liberal wonk stuff. This shit is just annoying. But and that was just kind of nefarious seeming. Like, it's like, well, this is actually like a front and a serious capitalist agenda to remold politics in their interests. It's not just annoying libs. It's actually a nefarious.
I would agree, and I think that like with YIMBYism, like, you know, again, I'm talking about this separate from rezoning, which rezoning is the thing that Zoran supports, that Bernie Sanders supports. Rezoning. But
yeah, I don't have a problem with that either.
Serious
like,
sort of it has become kind of a capitalist cult, you know, like it's sort of to an absurd degree. Like if you think about it, if health insurance companies, when Medicare for All was like an idea that seemed like it was maybe going to happen, if health insurance companies were able to astroturf a cult full of where they could get people to be really into the idea of opening the exchanges across state lines and convincing people that that was the, you know, sort of central idea, and that everybody who was for Medicare for All actually wanted the old people to die. And there's like these true believers that are convinced that this is going to transform the world. And it's like, I just don't know. There's probably other examples, but I do think that it is sort of a strange thing for capital to be able to like astroturf a cult. And especially as it starts to merge with effective altruism now, people who are already in another cult, it's just like people who have taken capitalism and brought it into their like their soul, you know, like it's totally in their minds and their heart. And it's not just making money and buying stuff and trying to support your family.
Yeah, it's much more than that. It's scary. It's real. Hopefully SF is not the, you know, hopefully the abundant people don't have their way, and SF is not the case study for the rest of the world, the rest of the country. It seems like it's already happening a little bit, and we'll definitely keep on the cult watch. Kate, I think you have to run. Thank you so much for making the time today, for all of your research and like advocacy on this issue. I think we've all learned a lot from you today. Anything that you want to plug before you sign off? I know you have a new Dystopia Now podcast that we can put in the chat.
My podcast Dystopia Now is on it's on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, every podcast platform. I do need to update the YouTube list. We have more. We have a fully updated version though on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and we talk about all the different sort of tech ideologies. Like we've done an episode. We've done like long-termism. We've done the tech right. We've had doomers versus accelerationists with AI, and we really go into these sort of tech ideologies, the network state, and so it's almost like a cult podcast, but for like things that are happening in the world. And I think it's funny. We try to have a good time laughing at these dumbass bros, but
there's a lot to laugh at.
Yeah, definitely check out Dystopia Now, and you can follow me on Instagram at kate.willet, and then I'm on Twitter at katewillet if you want to see me yell at Yimbys too much.
No, it's great. I love watching you yell at Yimbys. You're very good at that, and you do the hard work of exposing the real material.
Well,
you need a medal for your service.
Yeah.
Thank you. It was great to talk to you guys.
Thank you, comrade. We appreciate it.
Take it easy.
So much.
Thanks.
Bye.
Okay. Something I was kind of thinking about that kind of connects to the next topic. This idea that that sort of tech right folks have about democracy. Democracy is the main thing that stands in the way of the market functioning, the ability of homeowners to hold up, process, but just generally kind of democracy is what's causing market inefficiencies. If we look at the global economy right now, I don't think you can really say that democracy is the main thing that is keeping the market from working. I would say right now it's the tariffs that are, going on, especially the tariffs on China. I would say that's probably the main thing that's keeping the global market, from functioning super effectively. And it's interesting, I think, like, the Elon Musk and some of the tech right folks are kind of on the outs on this move by the Trump administration to impose tariffs on China. We did see the sort of exemptions for, basically Apple products. So there is definitely some weakening on that. But it is interesting, like, while we are seeing this sort of Sovcore tech dystopian kind of political push by the Trump administration. At the same time, there's also this kind of Trump's longstanding, interest in tariffs and, this longstanding interest of kind of an economic war on China, decoupling the U.S. from China, is kind of also coming to the fray as an important political tendency within the Trump administration. So I think we want to talk now about China, about the sort of trade war that's going on, what's been happening and what do we think the future kind of holds here. It's been a whirlwind. I know when we discussed kind of the tariff situation a week or so ago, we were trying to understand like what's the motivation, and I don't think we could really piece it together. Why are they doing this? It does seem now with the tariffs kind of pulled back and the focus squarely on China, the picture to me at least is becoming perhaps a little more clear, although, subject to change day over day. It does seem like this is an attempt for the total decoupling of the American economy with the Chinese economy. I think there may be still some questions around what that might look like. But it does seem like, the Trump administration is willing to see a hit to the global market, pass on an impact to consumers, in order to kind of wield power in negotiations with, other countries, China, but also big businesses as well. So it does seem like it's a negotiating, kind of tactic. We'll see whether it works or not. It does seem like, this is a, complex multipolar world, and maybe this kind of, bullying negotiating tactic may not be, something that can work in that environment.
Right. I think at first, I think I was kind of open to the idea that maybe Trump does have this very misguided idea that he really is going to like bring back manufacturing. I don't think that was really the plan. I don't know. It just doesn't work. No matter you have to be absolutely just delusional to think that that was like a realistic plan to bring back manufacturing. Maybe it was like red meat for the base that wanted that. I think some people are going with like the explanation that this was just like a pump and dump scheme for him to make a bunch of.
There have been some like reports of
cronies.
fraudulent, or at least kind of like suspected fraudulent trades that kind of happened like immediately before the announcements of the tariffs, right?
Yeah, I mean, he tweeted about an hour or so after he announced that he wasn't going to do a pause on the tariffs. He said something like, "Now's the perfect time to buy." And then a couple of hours later, then announced a pause. And then a couple of hours after that, pointed around at his friends and said, "Hey, look, he made like $1 billion. He made like $800 million today." So it's pretty clear that partly the point of it was to, make money from the manipulation or whatever. Like, I think it's becoming a lot harder to sustain the fantasy that Trump is engaging in some sort of 9-dimensional chess thing with this. Because he keeps walking it back. Like I think, for example, China is like beginning to realize that we can sort of just call the bluff that he's making, and he'll have to back down eventually. That's what you see with like the exceptions that he's passed. I would argue that this is why I don't think he has a plan. Because last, that week when he announced the tariffs or whatever, a few days after that on Friday or so. This was when he was doing the whole like, "Oh, I'm not going to pause the tariffs" or whatever. Bond markets, like the yield of a U.S. 10-year Treasury skyrocketed on Friday to the point where if he hadn't stopped, if he hadn't said something to prevent yield from going ballistic, would have probably crashed the financial system, the world's financial system. So I think that's kind of an evidence that he hasn't thought it past the first step, because as soon as he saw, that institutional investors, which were the ones who buy treasuries, were dumping them. He stepped back.
Yeah, I was listening to Adam Tooze talking about this, and something interesting that he pointed out was that, like, sort of contrary to the narrative that like Trump did kind of fold or pull back on the tariffs. If you look at kind of the net effect on the consumer, the American consumer, of these tariffs, it's actually higher now. The effect on the consumer is higher now with the sort of current rate of tariffs on China than it was during the initial round of tariffs that were kind of more broad based. And he kind of speculated that like perhaps the sort of initial round of tariffs was not really intended to last and was intended to be more of like an attempt to a scare tactic, as it were, to kind of figure out, who are the folks who will comply and who are the folks who will kind of, be, opponents, and then kind of move accordingly. I still agree with you, Joseph, that maybe it's not, a sound economic plan for, bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. But I do think that, like, I don't think it's a particularly well thought out plan, but it does seem like there's at least some thinking here that seems to be emerging.
I don't know. I'm of the opinion that, first off, scientifically speaking, we can't know what Trump is thinking, except for Trump. And even then, I don't think he has a particularly reasoned or controlled thinking process. So I'm not even sure he really knows. To be honest, that's kind of, for me, like where the conversation ends. There is no plan. Stop trying to rationalize what Trump is doing. He doesn't even know what he's doing. I think the main question is really like, what are the effects going to be, right? And what does it say about the world we live in, and what does it portend, especially when it comes to like we're kind of re-entering into a sort of great powers contest that is analogous to the late 19th century and to the early 20th century, and that portends, we know how that ended, that economic contest, of capitalism and imperialism. It ended in World War, right? So I'm a bit scared that we're entering into a sort of new great powers contest, quite frankly.
That is, I mean, I've been saying this for a while. I've been saying this since the Biden administration, but I think that we are heading towards a war with China.
I think that's the plan.
Yeah, I think there is a plan. I think that kind of is what this was all directed towards, at least how it's all shaping
well,
up.
It could be, making the world choose sides.
Right,
Europe,
exactly.
As I understand, is maybe a little more, has a more diverse perspective on the role of China, where there are, Germany, for example, I think has a pretty, strong connection to China. And so I think that they are maybe a little less strictly adversarial. And so, you could view this, this is a way of kind of, dividing up the world. And I know that China is also thinking about this as well, probably more, with more investment than the U.S. in terms of state, investment and policy.
One thing
they're leaning into regional partnerships. I know that since the tariffs were kind of announced, there have been, a couple of press releases from the Chinese state where they are talking about now is the time where we're looking at the, 14 or so countries that kind of border the country and really kind of building up that block. So it does seem like there are, differing, an attempt to kind of divide the world into, the American sphere and the Chinese sphere. Although it's unclear how that will work in kind of a multipolar, global market. I think maybe that's a little different than, the first time that we, Jamil, kind of the era.
Well, and it's the way that countries will have to pick between the U.S. and China that sets it up for proxy wars, basically.
Yeah.
Which is what's very concerning.
I'm actually curious also to hear, I mean, Carlos, I think you know better than I. How are the financial markets responding? I mean, I know that the stock market has been plummeting, but what beyond that can we say? Because it's not a very detailed analysis.
I mean, the stock market, I mean, it's kind of restabilized, but it's only happening because of the game that the administration is playing with, putting the tariffs in and putting the tariffs out. The trouble really was in the bond market, and it's still really volatile. The reason why that's important is because the 10-year treasury is essentially the basis of the international financial system. It's the safest asset, the safest cash equivalent asset. It's known as a safety asset. So when everything is going to shit, so to speak, the expected behavior you should see is money piling into treasuries, right? Instead, the opposite happened, which was that money flowed out of treasury. And what that does is eventually increases the borrowing cost for the government. If it gets too high, then you have a situation where, you have a fiscal death spiral. But just the lack of confidence itself brings instability to financial markets. It means that, they can't plan, they can't, do whatever it is that they do. But I think that's a big concern, is that I think capital's still looking at this and saying, what is actually happening with the tariffs?
Yeah, they're I mean, this is also kind of it shows you, and it links back to what we were saying. I think that there's a certain faction of the capitalist class, especially spearheaded by the tech right, which sees Trump's bullshit populism as a Trojan horse for pushing their program. But it also shows you that they're not in full control of the horse, so to speak, right? They still do have to deal with the volatility of a Trump administration. And it just shows you the complexity of the affair. In other words, he's not just he's not simply their puppet, right? And the question is, when are they going to start rebelling against that? That's another thing that might actually, and it links back to what we were saying, which is that maybe the abundance people also realize, well, we can present ourselves as the kind of more reasonable, sustainable background politics on which capital can push its program, because Trump is too volatile. But yeah, it really shows you that he's really I just
in terms of when are they going to start pushing back on him?
Yeah,
I don't know. It seems like they, at least before he announced the tariffs, he had met with a bunch of like CEOs, and it seems like they weren't able to dissuade him completely because he went ahead. But it also seems like, for example, the head of JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, for example, had called. He was basically saying that like, oh, if this goes through, we're going to have a recession.
Yeah.
JP Morgan had released like a report saying their analysis saying there's going to be there's more than 50% of a chance of a recession in the next 6 months. After the exemptions were passed, they walked everything back. Like Jamie Dimon was like, actually, I don't think there's going to be a recession. They retracted their reports. So I think there's like a back and forth going on where they're like, there's factions of them that are like meeting behind the scenes and trying to dissuade them, and then in public they're trying to everybody's trying to keep a smile on and say, oh, there's no problem, kind of thing.
It's a very strange, really weird situation.
Yeah, there does seem to be a disconnect between like sort of the more long-term political thinking on this that is like, zero-sum US-China battle for sort of global hegemony and like, what is actually in business interests right now. But I do think that, there are factions on the tech right that are kind of, American exceptionalists, like the Palantir folks, even like the Andreessen techno-utopian or techno-optimist, kind of manifesto, I think includes like American exceptionalism and references China as kind of.
But they're also, that's all. I mean, of course, they can have a spiritual worldview, but their bottom line is their bottom line. These are firms that depend very heavily on semiconductors, and semiconductors are not produced in the US, right? They are produced in Taiwan and in China. So of course they could try to like be protectionist or whatever, but it's going to fuck their bottom line. So ultimately, what are they going to go for? They don't give a shit about American exceptionalism.
I think they're working on that because they just got TSMC to sign a deal to open up a new plant in Arizona. But these things take time. Like
they take a lot of time.
It's going to take at least 4 or 5 years before that factory is spun up.
And for it to be operating at its maximal capacity, is going to take more than that probably.
Right. So this transition period that is going to be what they're going to have to navigate, which is going to be really interesting, and I imagine filled with morbid symptoms, right?
They're going to be trying to hoard chips, but the problem is that there is a capacity for the production of chips, right? Or they can't just pump out infinite quantities all at once and hoard it. So they're maybe they also one factory is not going to like replace global capacity for production.
Yeah, I do think these tech right people, they would be totally down to go to war with China and take out the People's Republic and turn it into a neo-colony where they can, have tons of cheap labor. If they could do that on the cheap, I'm sure they would be happy to. But the question is, how are they going to, navigate that politically? Because it's like, you said, they have to.
But also China is more than just a pool of cheap labor. Like at this point, there's actually much cheaper labor. If you go to like, I don't know, like Bangladesh or Vietnam or something. The thing that China has.
Well, yeah, I mean, at this point, it's a potential
competitor. The thing that China has, which is incredible, is not only do they have a massive labor force, they have a well-trained labor force. And you can't just like, that's another thing about the US is like, you guys talked about this last time. There's this kind of like let's assume that they're sincere about these tariffs and that you see these protectionist measures as like helping spur the development of manufacturing, right, in the US. Then there has to be this assumption that spontaneously, like the market forces will be able to produce the massive infrastructure and workforce that can allow for this reshoring. But the truth is that capital, including the labor power and the trained labor power, is not here in the US. And that takes time to develop. And and you need to have a conscious plan in place, more or less, right? Something like
right, which is kind of where the teal guys get this whole state capacity obsession. Because I do think they realize, like Kate mentioned it, like the state capacity libertarian people. Like I think it does kind of reflect this realization that like, yeah, they do like have this extreme libertarian hyper free market ideology, but they also want to have state capacity in order to have the infrastructure to realize these projects.
Yeah, you need an industrial policy in place. You need some actor to coordinate the various capitals, right? I mean, it would be a massive effort, and to hope that more or less by blind chance things will align is wishful thinking. So, I mean, yeah, no, it's just as I said.
Yeah, I mean, it's what's interesting about MAGA right now is you do have all these different factions of the ruling class and of their political, entities, I guess, who are basically seem incapable of coming up with some kind of coherent political agenda. And so it just comes off as just complete chaos, and it just seems like America is just destroying itself, Gorbachev style.
Oh, even worse than Gorbachev. I mean, like for all of Gorbachev's many problems, he was a kind of neo-Leninist with a deep spiritual worldview, and really wanted to rejuvenate the socialist and democratic project, but this is just like, I don't even.
It really reflects the fact that the American ruling class has no clear ideas.
Oh, no. The Chinese are laughing. The Chinese ruling class is strategic at things in decades and centuries. The American ruling class is just like on ketamine and fucking idiotic.
Well, they're learning from Trump-induced crisis to Trump-induced crisis without seemingly an ability to break. At some point, they have to take stock and say, well, we should probably break at this point. It's doing more harm than good. But they seem incapable of doing that as well.
Well, it's that Benny Johnson line, right? Of like, money's not real. What's real is, American exceptionalism, white America, like our values and so on. But it does.
Bro, you're not losing anything.
You can't put a price tag on your
You're not
country.
losing anything by losing your retirement. You're literally losing money, you dipshit.
Yeah, it is funny how they just they completely abandon like any kind of materialism or like any kind of they just go full like
fucking dolly,
spiritual. We don't need to worry about whether we have food on the table because we have our American spiritual values.
They become MAGA Buddhists, so you become detached from, you become ascetic. No, but the other thing is like what we were saying, which is like these fucking hogs. You know what finally it is? It's just Trump. It's just an obsession with Trump. And they have to come like after the fact and justify whatever Trump does, right? And Trump is great because he pisses off the libs. That's it. That's like for so many of the hogs, that's like what matters. It's just that Trump is great and he pisses off the libs. So whatever Trump does, I have to come after the fact and rationalize it.
I mean,
hold on, there's a post I gotta show that's just like totally summarizes the mindset that these people have of like no matter like as long as we piss off the libs, I don't care like how much I suffer. Like it's hold on.
I mean, I do think that
I remember the MAGA account who posted it. I just have to find the actual post itself.
I don't know. I think there's maybe a little more to it, Jimmy. Like, I don't think you're wrong that like people are kind of just, taking Trump to piss off the libs. But I do think there is also like a real sense of declining American hegemony that people kind of want answers to, especially kind of like, white America. Yeah, let's look at this, Donald.
Is that Pep fused with a lady?
Yeah, it's like a
dog. I can't believe 4chan is still a thing that people
boomers can't retire. Good. You'll never buy a house. Never had a chance. You'll lose your job. Never had one. You will pay more. Never paid for anything anyways. I voted for this, and you lost.
That's like living in their parents' house or something.
Yeah, I mean it's the MAGA dream, man. This is yeah.
Oh my God. It's definitely like a nihilism, like things are so fucked for me, like like just screw it, like burn everything down.
Burn the world down, man.
The levels of hope are extreme.
This has also brought up questions for me, and like just to kind of take a step back and look at high politics, which is like how do we socialists envision trade in the future, right? And what would a socialist trade regime, so to speak, look like, right? Because we also don't want to be caught in the situation of like defending global free trade, one of the great biblical principles of liberalism, right? I mean, that's there's obvious problems with that, right? So the question is like, what does a just policy of trade look like, right? What can we start to think about that, think that through? And what would that look like even today in terms of the concrete politics we're pushing? Because I think that's something that like we don't want to get caught in the lib game of like, oh, these free trade is great, the prices will go up,
right.
the market.
Because that's the thing about these tariffs is it feels like it's almost like shit coding the idea of like criticizing like neoliberalism and globalization. It's like, oh, so it's like that Armando Malusi guy we were shitting on earlier. He had a post where it was like, this is what you get. This is what the left always wanted. The left was always going after like neoliberal globalization. Now they get what they wanted, and they're all complaining. And it's like, well, no, this isn't really what we wanted. Like, yeah, we were critical of neoliberal globalization, but like, we didn't want to like the regress to economic nationalism. That idea was always alter globalization, which is like we kind of want to build on globalization to make it more egalitarian. Was always like the mainstream like radical left, I guess, position, which is I think the correct position, honestly. And I think I'm not like a Xi guy per se, but I think China does like have a kind of alter globalizationist vision as well. They don't China doesn't go for a economic nationalist approach, even if they might be forced into one by necessity. I don't think they'll stop trading with other countries. But regardless, I think I think the problem isn't global exchange of goods as such. It's the super exploitation of the global South by the global North. That's the problem.
Thoughts on it. Like, I agree with that. What I'll say is that I think the purpose of a socialist trade policy should be ultimately to reverse the effects of underdevelopment and dependency on economic regimes of the third world. So I think like I don't have a cookbook for the future, but I would say that like the big part about it, especially like if we ever get like a socialist political revolution in the US, is essentially it should be our responsibility to understand that like we need to give for example third world countries favorable terms of trade. So what that means is a place like Cuba, for example, might not be able to afford machines or like means of production, generally speaking. Like the idea should be to reverse the trend of like extracting the super exploitation of these places and more or less give them means of production for highly favorable or even for free. Like in a sense, like the way that China does it, except that China still expects payment, and China will take your port, for example.
Well, I mean, the Soviet Union, for instance.
I was about to say the Soviet Union kind of did like
sugar. They had places that produced sugar within the Soviet Union,
right?
Caucasus or I don't know where, but they did. So it was basically their program of trade was more or less just subsidizing whatever living standard the Cubans had. I mean, the main thing is like, and it's gonna sound. I haven't thought about these things in a while, so I don't want to sound superficial, but how are you going to sell to the proletariat of the first world that they need to... No, let me take it back, because I don't even know if I have it properly formulated, but...
Getting into the third world is
I mean,
well, like, how are you going to sell to first world proletarians a reduction of their living standards?
Yeah, more or less. More or less.
Well, it's gonna. I mean, I'm not gonna say it's not gonna be easy, and it's gonna entail some sort of cultural revolution. It's gonna entail
inequalities in America are unjust, but the living standard of, say, a sweatshop worker in Bangladesh is another universe.
Well, it's important to, like, you need to make people understand that the only reason why you're able to afford this standard of living is because we super exploit, we deprive like large portions of the planet of the value that they produce. That's the first thing that Americans need to be made to understood, is that this was never, like, this wasn't fair. This wasn't fair development.
Of course, but the cynical people might say, "Who gives a shit? I already struggle enough in my condition, right?" The situation would be resolved very easily if we could say there will be, and to use a buzzword, there will be super abundance, and the living standard of all in the world can be ameliorated past the average even of the first world worker.
Be careful with that.
But exactly, you know what I'm saying?
Right. Well, I guess this is kind of where I have a problem with like degrowth. Not that like everything under degrowth is like a bad idea, but it's just like I don't think that you can like sell the idea of like a steady state economy. Like, nor do I even think that it's like necessarily desirable. Like I don't think you can have zero growth whatsoever, even in the first world. It's just that growth will be like totally defined in a different way and in different.
Well, yeah, it's more like,
like I feel like if you assume that there will be no economic growth, then like, yes, first world living standards will get worse because you can only have economic growth at the expense of the first world. But if we actually recalibrated how economic growth worked, then that would be the solution.
Well, yeah,
that's
absolutely.
How I would look at it.
The question is what sort of growth and in what kind of society. And then there are certain areas where quote unquote growth doesn't need to happen, like fucking advertisement. But there are other areas where, like, for instance, access to medical services and medical infrastructure does need to grow because, there are certain things that could be built given global wealth to improve the standard of living beyond consumer goods, like the production of hospitals. That would be relatively easy to solve, right? It would not require massive quote unquote transfers of wealth from first to third world, and that's already a start, right? Is assuring that those certain things are provided in some kind of transfer of wealth that would not actually, if you were to dispossess the capitalist class, lead to a large reduction in living standard of the first world,
Right. I think it's the problem is how we define living standards in terms of GDP. And I think the degrowthers are right about that. It's honestly just like partly like how they sell it and how they frame it in a lot of ways.
Labor creates all wealth. Yeah, actually, it was in a sense unequal exchange, but of course, like I don't mean that in some moral sense. Like the USSR absolutely did not need Cuban sugar. Like it just didn't. It really saw its subsidies as more or less a means of.
Well, I guess it would be unequal exchange for the USSR, but it wasn't unequal.
No, not at all. I mean, they already had sources of sugar.
They traded oil, petroleum products for sugar. Like that is pretty.
It was more or less. I mean, like it was more or less a means of expressing solidarity and then also assuring political support, right? I mean, that's kind of what it was. Not to get too much into like a real politic way of understanding things, but that's what it was, and that's okay. The USSR was actually quite generous in the aid it gave. For instance, Algeria, right after the war, the Algerian Revolution, they kind of flirted with the Americans to try to get aid, and the Americans were very reticent. And eventually the USSR stepped up and really won Algeria's support materially, because it showed we're going to give you machinery. We're going to send you people to teach you how to use it. We're going to send professors. That's wonderful solidarity. And they didn't get economically anything out of it, quite frankly.
Brendan Sullivan made a good point. This is what I was going to say, actually, which is that there's just the amount of massive amounts of waste and the immense amounts of it that a planned economy would be able to eliminate. There's a lot of, there's all kinds of expense excesses.
Well, for instance, in terms of investment of means of production, labor power, advertisement is completely superfluous to any human need, right? there are things like that, like you could just eliminate tomorrow that are just a massive waste of resources. Fucking like the health insurance and massive waste of resources. I mean, god damn it! Like you take 1 year of the fucking Pentagon's budget, and you've built how many millions of hospitals across the across the world, right? You know what I'm saying? And enough for with the money to maintain them for time. You know, I mean, it's so in terms of quote unquote transfers of wealth, they're quite easy things to do that could have just exponentially improved the lives of people across the planet. But it's certainly worth thinking about. I think the main thing is like obviously we're not going to come up with the answers here right now, right? But like it's important to start. Yeah, exactly. Planned obsolescence. That's another good example. But it's important to start thinking about like what does a socialist trade look like and engage like these very difficult problems. There will be no easy answers, right? But it's important for us to start developing like a counter narrative to, well, the tariffs are bad because globalization is good, to be simplistic, right?
Yeah, and we don't want to sort of fall into the economic nationalist sort of trap as well as socialists. I mean, I do think we've kind of hit on the essential quality of this is that like the way that we determine, you know, value and you know how things are distributed is like, you know, not in alignment with human need, you know, on an international level or even a national level. And so, you know, the socialist project, I think, is really about like creating mechanisms by which people can determine, you know, like what makes sense to do with the economy, with the kind of, you know, means of production, you know, to kind of bring that control to working people. I think something that's like very important is like international coordination. And it's something that I think like, you know, I've been reading a little bit about like Venezuela, like Harnacker's interviews with Chavez, and he talks a lot about like his attempts to try to build kind of like a Latin American, you know, international trade bloc, which didn't really work out because, you know, they just didn't have, you know, kind of folks who were willing to kind of go along and you know, kind of not, you know, be in the American sphere. I think that's maybe like the there's this kind of question around like what's the right governance system at an international level to determine global trade. But then I think there is also like this sort of more nuts and bolts political question of like how does one actually move towards that system when there is all this dependency on the sort of like capitalist market, you know, on the U.S. or China or things like that. So maybe in principle, relatively straightforward, but practically very, it's, you know, it's, I think, been the stumbling block of, you know, socialist attempts to build kind of alternatives.
Yeah, I mean, even in like the USSR, you had people complaining that like, oh, we subsidize these third world countries like too much, and that's why, you know, we have to wait in line to get tomatoes or whatever. Like, you know, that was a thing. I mean, and you had you know, ethnic Russians complaining that the other ethnic republics were living at the expense of them, you know, and so you do get these issues.
Yeah, it's not
that
easy.
Are
you know, there's no
popping up.
There's no
not easy.
solution. I mean,
but,
the counter force to that is to thoroughly develop socialist consciousness and culture and education, but even then, sort of the nationalist tendencies will come out and they'll.
Oh yeah, I think you do have to make people's lives better in a material
Yeah.
sense. You know, you do have to offer development to people, and I think, you know, there is.
I mean, the planning apparatus that had been built up did not work eventually.
Yeah, exactly. That's the other thing is, you know, there's just a lot of problems with Soviet planning itself, and we can go deeper into that later on, I think.
But it does get into the question around like how we make decisions about, you know, the allocation of resources, and clearly those models, you know, have some flaws in terms of the way that they made those decisions. To say,
I mean, planning an economy is already hard enough. Planning a global economy is, you know, I mean, it's orders of magnitude more complicated. So.
Yeah, I will say though, like, I do find like the leftists were like defending the tariffs to be like kind of extra disgusting because they are basically like defending this disgusting government that we currently have, and they are kind of like making this alliance. Like some of the union leaders, some of their softness on these tariffs is just like, no, you're not going to get enough out of this to justify making a deal with this
fucking
useful idiots. They're useful idiots.
Yeah, you're just a useful idiot. You're not going to get
useful
anything.
idiots.
Like leading the working class down like a blind alley. It's really bad.
Yeah, it's just, these tariffs are not going to help the working class at all. There's no way. I mean, I guess like the UAW, they think it might help like certain certain manufacturers, which will help them. But that's just when has this strategy of like class collaborationism on terms of like economic nationalism actually been good for unions? You know, like it might be good in like the short term, but in the long term, it just ties you to the state and turns you into a corporatist.
I mean, you could argue that that is the literal history of the post-war union movement. A deep state loyalism, which at a certain point in the Keynesian regime allowed for unprecedented growth and affluence for sections of the working class. But then eventually, what does that state loyalism buy you? You get betrayed, hacked up to pieces, and destroyed.
It makes even less sense now, though, because there is no Keynesianism. It hasn't existed in at least 2 generations.
Yo, that's
what are they defending?
It's my favorite take recently. Is like we're like in a new like Keynesian era, like, you know, again.
Yeah, no, it's like no, we're like leaving neoliberalism, but we're not returning to like post.
I mean, are we?
We're like returning to like 19th century capitalism, which is actually like, if you think about neoliberalism, was itself kind of like a return to 19th century capitalism.
I mean, yeah, in many ways.
As opposed to the post-war era was the anomaly.
Yeah, I'm actually beginning to, you know, how a couple of years ago there was a whole debate about whether neoliberalism is being, I'm beginning to think no.
Of course not.
I'm beginning to think the opposite. Even you might think somewhat ironically because of all its protectionism and whatnot, but I don't see that the relationship between state and society is being fundamentally reconfigured here.
Nah.
I think some things are going to change. I think the global political architecture is going to change. I think the basic premise of neoliberalism, which is that the state and the market are going to combine, and the state's primary goal is to kind of create markets and reproduce them as efficiently as possible. I think that's
it's about removing barriers to accumulation.
It's sort of like neoliberalism sans globalization. It's like neoliberalism, once you've accepted that, okay, we're gonna have distinct national blocks essentially for accumulation.
Yeah. And that's a very worrying development. Just because of, I mean, of course, one instance is not enough to make a generalization, but you know, history rhymes or whatever. And
no, I mean, that is the first step towards a redivision of the world, and
it's bad. I trust China more to be level-headed because that's what they've shown.
President Xi, please, if you can hear us.
Well, no, they've been very level-headed throughout this whole thing, and I think that that's what's going to cause the strategy of the U.S. to backfire. Is like they're acting so irrational. China acts level-headed, so all of the potential allies of the U.S. are going to go with China because China isn't acting like a cracked-out
fucking lunatic.
You know, fucking.
I mean, they still have to trade with China. You know, they still have to do that. So
we all depend on Chinese goods. No, I mean, the other take I've loved recently is how people are like, we're finally fighting back against Chinese cheating. They joined the World Trade Organization, but they steal IP. And it's like, dude, like, first off, the U.S. in the early 20th century did nothing but steal quote unquote IP. Secondly,
I know,
which allowed it to be where it is today. Secondly, IP is a massive impediment to economic development, quite frankly. Like,
no, that's the coolest thing that China does is stealing like all that American
like
IP.
they love talking about that shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, oh, they're stealing IP.
Oh man, there was a really funny tweet.
They're stealing my garbage phone game software. Like,
yeah, no, it was somebody like was selling like they made like a mug that was like a beer mug that was like shaped like a mushroom or something, and they were selling it online. And I guess like some Chinese company like stole their design and started selling it. And they were like, China stole my mushroom mug, or like it's just, and everyone was just clowning on it.
It's not even that they stole it. You hired them to make it.
Yeah, but they just
No. I mean, I love the whole like China steal shit. First off, like shut the fuck up about rules-based international order. Like, people in Fallujah have higher rates of cancer because of the use of uranium-tipped shells. People in Afghanistan have limbs mutilated because of the use of fucking shotguns, which is forbidden by the Geneva Conventions. Fucking children in Gaza are starving right now, all because the US does not give a fuck about international-based anything. So this whole complaining about IP and the international rules-based, shut the fuck up. America is the biggest crook and criminal on the goddamn planet. They'll do whatever they want and then say you're breaking the rules when it fucking helps them. It's so annoying. It's like the amount of war crimes that the US has committed, and you're going to talk about rules-based system? Like, as Chomsky said, every president should be in the fucking Nuremberg trials. Like, God, it's ridiculous.
Hold on, I found it.
Innovation, bro.
I had IP stolen from me by China.
You're literally,
I was you're
literally drinking beer.
Funky beer glass.
Bro, yeah, that's an actual mushroom head. What the fuck?
It's literally.
I know, it's like they're talking about it like this was like a nuclear fusion.
Bro, this is
guy,
a shape.
Up with, and like Chinese spies like infiltrated the lab and like stole it or whatever.
He's mad that he can't like patent geometry. Like, what the hell is this?
Yeah, my God, dude. Like, literally, he literally has a dildo cup, and he's like, they stole my genius idea. Like,
they stole it. The Chinese stole it. We need to go to war now. We need 150% tariffs, and we need war. We need to go to war now, man. These people are just. They're destroying America. They're destroying America. America's losing because of these guys. Like, this is
why the third world has to have the shitty living conditions it does, because we have to produce this dog.
I know, exactly, and that's the thing is, like, if you really think about it, like, if we get people like this in the United States producing things, maybe we won't have to worry about living
what
standards going
what
down.
beer is it? I'm just curious. Like, what can you see?
Let's see if the video. You can't. It's like some kind of craft.
I mean, clearly, the only idiot that would drink out of that, like.
Yeah, I'm trying to know what the purpose of why is this supposed to be, like, for the fizz or something?
It's funky.
Yeah, I don't
it's cool and funky.
Like, that is the most useless beer glass.
It's kind of cool and
Yeah,
funky, I guess.
How do you drink out of that?
I mean, I like mushrooms.
Casey says
guess,
this is the most useless beer glass I've ever seen, and it's probably an IPA. I was thinking as well. Yeah, it's probably.
Like, how do you put it around your, like? It just seems like it would be difficult to sip out of. You know what I'm saying? Like, just okay. This is why we can't. What are the responses to that? What are people saying there?
We used to have a country.
Here, you have to patent your designs when someone says, and then even then, what? File a lawsuit in China? That's right, punk. China wins. China wins.
Okay. Also,
why did you ship a concept to a manufacturing plant in China? Because I was a noob. That's right. Americans always lose because they don't.
I'm here for it.
Sometimes comments like restore my faith in humanity, but this series of comments is not.
Cheers for the recommendation, mate.
No, this is funny. Cheers for the recommendation, mate. Just
see, that's based. That's awesome.
That's just a good wall. That's just a terrible comment.
Oh man.
Oh my God. See, this is what I'm saying about comments. Sometimes you have to.
Why are you trying to drink from a dick-shaped glass?
Oh my God. I love it. It's so dumb.
This is gay as fuck. You have no idea.
Oh my God.
And he says, I hope you ask Jesus for forgiveness.
Oh my God, that's what I'm saying. So we're hopeless. Like, not, but.
Oh man. No.
I need an expert in like IP law to tell me, can you even patent something like this? It's a simple shape, relatively.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you can't. Like, I think you can. I think it's pretty like easy to patent shit. Like, you can make like a minor modification.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
We're patenting shapes now.
Yeah, it's we're patenting glass shapes, dude.
I would love us to have an expert on sometime in the next couple of weeks to talk about like sort of where does, what's China's strategy in all of this? Like, if it is, is it the end of neoliberalism or not? It sounds like we're maybe, unclear on that, leaning maybe not the end of neoliberalism. It does seem like maybe, the end of American hegemony is maybe more, upon us. So I think, it would be worth us thinking about, okay, what is a world that is more, where China has hegemony? Like, what is their strategy? What would that look like? For the world market. That's something I'm very interested in. There's is China socialist? Is China capitalist? That kind of, that's a big conversation. If they are going to be the person who's kind of setting, the country that's setting the terms of the global market, like, be incumbent upon us to learn a little more about, what their strategy.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll definitely have experts, but the main thing is that the financial system is very much Americanized and dollarized.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the first thing that you have to start with. The other thing is like, in general, we should have someone talk about the kind of Bretton Woods financial system for us and break it down for us.
We're trying to get Michael Roberts on, right?
Yeah. Or the Wolf.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Hopefully we can get both on at some point.
Yeah, that'd be great. We probably should. So that's our plan, is hopefully for next week or the week after that, we'll have someone come talk to us about the global trade regime today and what this means for the global trade regime and historically how it developed, etc. So and then an expert on Chinese economics would be great. I'm always
there's a lot of angles to take on this.
Yeah, absolutely. But I guess before we close out, for people in the chat, what would they maybe like to hear us talk about, analyze, riff on?
Yeah, hit us with suggestions in the chat or hit us up on social media. Do we want to anything new on Cosmonaut that we want to plug before we go? I know we've had some interesting articles. I was in a podcast with Isaac that I think dropped today with Jared Shanahan and Alex Campbell, who are political prisoners on Rikers and wrote an anthropology. So we kind of interviewed them about their time on Rikers. That's new on the Cosmopod feed.
But check us out, in general, if you haven't heard of us. I'm guessing basically everyone who's watching has. But check out Cosmonaut Magazine. Share with your friends. Share the Cosmocast with your friends.
And support our Patreon.
Yeah, please do.
You have the extra money, of course. I know things are going to be tightening the belt soon. It's going to be tough economic times coming probably.
We do this on a completely voluntary basis.
Yeah, this is all volunteer work.
None of us get paid.
Please, those tariffs are going to kill us. So
guys, remember, money does not matter. What matters is putting forward, important Marxist, well,
I agree with that.
And informative.
Well, I agree with that, but we do need money to do certain things.
No, your money does not matter. So give us your money. It doesn't matter if you have it or not. It matters that we can produce this great content.
What a compelling pitch.
But definitely check out the interview that came out today, though, on Rikers Island.
Yeah.
Cosmonaut. And we have Rob Ashlar's part 3 on the Iraq War and insurgency. We have the article on the ACP. So yeah, lots of good stuff in Cosmonaut as always, and some good stuff in the works too, as always. And I think that's you can call it a day for today.
Yeah, thanks again to Kate for coming on, and definitely check out her podcast and her social media. I think Kate.Willet on Instagram and Kate Willet on Twitter.
Yes, Dystopia Now is the podcast, right?
Yeah, Dystopia Now. Yeah. So check that
definitely,
out.
Definitely check. That seems to cover a lot of similar stuff that we've been talking about. So I'm definitely going to be looking that up.
Yeah, but that's their exclusive focus, is these lunatics. Fucking Thomas Pynchon ass.
Yeah, no, it's Thomas Pynchon is a realist. I'm actually going to start reading Thomas Pynchon again for the first time.
Is that how you say it? I never heard it said. Pynchon.
Thomas Pynchon.
He's got a new book coming out.
Yeah, he's got a new book coming out, and they're making a movie out of it.
Yeah.
Is it going to be like Megalopolis?
Hopefully not. I didn't see that, but I heard it sucks.
Shit, Jesus.
Yeah.
Have you seen it? I would like to see it. Actually.
I started watching it, and I was like, nah.
It's pretty bad.
It's like really bad.
It's weird. Yeah.
Watch it for the vibes.
It's got vibes. It's got vibes. You know, maybe not good vibes, but it has a vibe.
I need more than just vibes for something. You know,
it's got vibes of like director in his like dying years.
It seems hallucinatory. It seems like if David Lynch was on acid or something.
Well, it makes it sound cool.
He already is. So,
but it's more like it's kind of like his characters are saying the kind of things that he believes as like a kind of old man, you know, kind of artist. You
That's
know.
actually a very typical of like older directors is they've had to some degree kind of mask beliefs in previous films for whatever reasons. And as they get older, they really want to use the pulpit or the film as a pulpit for their beliefs. So it becomes just kind of sermonizing, you know, it just becomes like an unsubtle sermonizing kind of.
We should bring back like, we should do like a little section for cultural, like, or maybe we can talk about a movie or a TV show or some music or something that we've been.
Some labor creates all wealth said I'd like a deep dive on Tesla versus BYD.
They don't even let BYD sell cars in the US because they know that they would wreck Tesla.
Yeah, that's something to look into. I'd have to read more on it, but that's definitely something I'd like to read more on.
They're really nice cars.
Yeah, I'd like to read also like on supply chains, supply chains of electric cars, because a lot of the mineral components come from regions that are just like riven with horrible conflict. And those conflicts are caused and also fueled by those supply chains. So it'd be interesting to do a dive on like, do Congolese minerals end up in Tesla cars, right? Yeah. Okay, guys. Well, thanks for joining.
Thanks for joining, everyone, and have a good rest of your Sunday.
Thanks, everyone.
That was good. Are we still live?